What actually makes a woman obsessed with you when she starts pulling away? Not begging for her attention, not sending a longer, more heartfelt text than the last one, not showing up with grand gestures to prove how much you care. It's silence. The quiet, deliberate kind. And once you understand why silence does what desperation never could, everything about how you handle being ignored is going to change. Here's what nobody tells you about being ignored. Your instinct is lying to you. Every fiber of your body wants to close the gap. You want to text again. You want to explain yourself. You want to ask what you did wrong. That instinct feels like love, feels like effort, feels like the responsible thing to do, but it isn't. It's fear wearing the costume of romance. And fear, my friend, has never made anyone irresistible. We're going to walk through exactly why chasing kills attraction, why disappearing works even though it feels counterintuitive and even a little cruel, and what you actually do step by step the next time she goes quiet on you. Stick with me until the end because the last piece of this is the one most people never figure out, and it's the difference between winning her back and losing her for good. Let's start with the moment itself, the unanswered text, the read receipt with no reply, the date that used to feel automatic, now feeling forced. You know the feeling. You've lived it. That specific ache of watching your phone, refreshing a conversation that isn't moving, wondering if you're overreacting or if something real just shifted underneath you. It's one of the loneliest feelings in modern dating because it happens in silence. And silence leaves you nothing to work with except your own imagination. And your imagination, left alone in that silence, will always tell you to do the wrong thing. It tells you to send one more message. It tells you to call. It tells you that if you just explain yourself clearly enough, she'll understand and come back. This is the trap, because what she experiences on the other end isn't your love, it's your anxiety. And anxiety, no matter how well-intentioned, is not attractive. It never has been. Think about the last time someone chased you for something you'd already mentally stepped back from. A salesperson, a friend pushing an invitation, anyone. The more they pushed, the more resistant you became, even if the thing itself wasn't bad. That's not because you're heartless, that's human nature. Pressure creates resistance, every single time. So here is the first principle, and it's the foundation everything else is built on. Attention that has to be begged for was never truly available in the first place. If she has to be convinced, cornered, or coaxed back into caring, what you're building isn't attraction, it's obligation. And obligation doesn't last. It resents, it curdles, it leaves the moment the pressure lets up. Let me tell you about a woman named Rachel, early 30s, living in a mid-sized city. The kind of person half the people watching this will recognize a piece of themselves in. Rachel was seeing a man for a few months. Nothing was wrong exactly. She just felt herself pulling inward, needing space to figure out what she actually wanted. She stopped replying as quickly. She got vague about weekend plans. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet retreat. He noticed immediately, of course, and he did what most of us do. He reached out more. Longer texts, a voice memo explaining his feelings, "Can we talk?" that arrived 3 times in 2 days. Rachel didn't feel loved by this. She felt suffocated by it. The space she needed to miss him was being filled up entirely by him, over and over, until there was no room left for her to feel anything except pressure to respond. Now, picture the alternate version. He notices the same pullback, and instead of closing the distance, he lets it exist. He doesn't disappear out of spite or punishment. That's a different game and a manipulative one, and we're not playing that game here. He simply stops performing urgency. He goes back to his life. He responds when she reaches out, warmly, briefly, without interrogation. And in that space, something happens that pressure could never produce. Rachel starts to wonder. She starts to notice his absence the way you only notice something once it stops being guaranteed. That's the whole mechanism right there. Presence you can always count on becomes invisible. Presence that becomes uncertain becomes magnetic. Not because you're playing games, because you're finally giving her room to miss you instead of a reason to manage you. If you've ever sent 3 follow-up texts after one unanswered message, right, I've done this in the comments. No shame in it. Almost everyone watching has done exactly that at least once. Let's go a layer deeper, because understanding the mechanism isn't enough. You need to understand what it replaces. The old pattern is reactive. Something shifts in her behavior, and your entire emotional state reorganizes around fixing it. You check your phone 40 times a day. You reread old messages looking for clues. Your mood for the whole day gets decided by whether 3 dots appeared and disappeared. This is not a relationship. This is a hostage situation, and you're both the hostage and the negotiator. The new pattern is different in a way that has nothing to do with tricking her and everything to do with reclaiming yourself. You go back to your gym schedule, you call your friends, you finish the project you'd been putting off. You are, in every visible way, still a whole and functioning person, whether she texts back in 5 minutes or 5 days. This isn't performance. This is what actually happens when your sense of worth stops being outsourced to her phone. And here's the quiet truth underneath it all. The version of you that doesn't need her to respond is the version she'll actually want to respond to. Nobody is drawn to a person who has handed them the keys to their entire emotional state. People are drawn to stability. People are drawn to someone who was already whole before they arrived. The old Stoics understood something about this 2,000 years before dating apps existed. They taught that peace comes from focusing only on what's within your control and releasing your grip on everything else. Her response time isn't within your control. Her mood isn't within your control. Your own steadiness is. That's the only lever you've ever actually had. If that idea hits home for you, write "within my control" in the comments. You'll know exactly why. Now let's talk about what silence is not, because this matters more than anything else in this video. Silence is not punishment. It is not a strategic weapon designed to make her suffer until she crawls back. If you're going quiet with the intention of hurting her, controlling her, or forcing a reaction out of manipulation, you've missed the entire point. And frankly, that approach will backfire. Because manipulation always eventually reveals itself. And once it does, whatever she felt for you curdles into something closer to distrust. Real silence, the kind that actually rebuilds attraction, comes from a completely different place. It comes from self-respect. It says, I want you, but I do not need you in order to be okay. It says, I will make room for you, but I will not shrink myself waiting in that room indefinitely. That distinction, wanting versus needing, is the entire difference between healthy detachment and cold manipulation. One comes from strength. The other comes from a wound dressed up as strategy. You are allowed to feel hurt when someone you care about goes quiet on you. That reaction is not weakness, and it is not something to be ashamed of. But you are also allowed to choose how you respond to that hurt. Chasing is one choice, grounding yourself is another. Neither makes you a bad person, but only one of them tends to lead somewhere good. Let's talk about a second story, because this idea deserves more than one angle. There's a man, we'll call him Daniel, mid-30s, a few years into dating again after a long relationship ended, who found himself in almost the exact position we've been describing. A woman he'd been seeing for 2 months went quiet after what seemed like a great date. No fight, no clear reason, just distance. Daniel's old pattern from his last relationship was to overfunction, to smooth things over immediately, to apologize even when he wasn't sure what he'd done wrong, just to make the discomfort stop. This time, he caught himself before sending the 4th message of the day. He deleted it. He put the phone face down. And instead of spiraling, he asked himself one question. If she never responds again, will I still be proud of how I showed up? That question changed everything for him, because it shifted his focus from controlling her behavior, which he never actually had power over, to controlling his own integrity, which he always had power over. He sent one warm, low-pressure message 2 days later, something like, "Hope things are good on your end. Happy to catch up whenever works." No accusation, no guilt trip, no 5-paragraph explanation of his feelings. Just a door left open without him standing in the doorway waiting. She responded 4 days after that, not because he'd cracked some secret code, but because the absence of pressure gave her room to come back on her own terms. And people almost always move towards things that feel like their own choice rather than someone else's demand. The lesson isn't that disappearing guarantees she'll return. Sometimes she won't, and that has to be okay too. We'll come back to that. The lesson is that how you carry yourself during the silence determines who you become on the other side of it, regardless of her decision. And that person, the one who stayed grounded instead of spiraling, is simply more attractive. Not as a trick, as a fact of human psychology. If you've ever caught yourself mid-spiral and managed to stop, write "caught myself" in the comments. That moment of self-awareness is bigger than people give it credit for. Let's address the fear underneath all of this, because it's the real reason chasing feels so necessary in the moment. The fear is, if I don't do something, I'll lose her. But think about that fear honestly for a second. If the only thing holding a connection together is your constant effort to hold it together, was it ever really secure in the first place? Real connection has some give to it. It can survive a few quiet days. It can survive you living your life instead of monitoring hers. If it can't survive that, if the entire thing collapses the moment you stop performing, then the silence didn't break it. The silence just revealed what was already fragile. This is loss aversion working against you, and it's worth naming directly. Your brain is wired to feel the threat of losing something far more intensely than the pleasure of gaining it. That's why one unanswered message can hijack your entire evening. But loss aversion is a survival mechanism from a much older world, not a reliable guide for modern relationships. You have to recognize it for what it is, a bias, not a truth, or it will drive every decision you make from a place of scarcity instead of confidence. Confidence, real confidence, doesn't mean pretending you don't care. It means caring and still being okay. It means, I hope this works out, and if it doesn't, I will still be fine. That sentence, held quietly in your chest instead of announced out loud, changes the entire energy you bring to every interaction afterward. People feel that energy. They always do, even when they can't name what they're feeling. Now here's where we get to the part most videos on this topic skip entirely, and it's the part that actually matters most. Everything we've discussed works because it's rooted in truth. You genuinely building a fuller life. You genuinely developing self-respect. You genuinely releasing your grip on outcomes you never controlled. If you try to fake this, if you go quiet while secretly seething, checking her social media 40 times a day, rehearsing what you'll say when she finally texts back, it will not work because the detachment isn't real. She will feel the performance underneath it even through a screen, even through silence itself. People are remarkably good at sensing desperation dressed up as calm. So the real work isn't learning a script to recite when she goes quiet. The real work is becoming someone who is genuinely, actually okay with or without her. That's not a tactic. That's a complete shift in where you're getting your sense of worth from. And once that shift happens, something interesting occurs. You stop needing techniques altogether because your natural state simply becomes magnetic on its own. If you're starting to realize this was never really about her at all, write, "It's about me" in the comments. Let's bring this back around to where we started, because the hook at the beginning of this video promised you an answer, and it's time to fully deliver on it. What makes a woman obsessed with you when she starts to pull away isn't a message, a gesture, or a clever line. It's the quiet, undeniable fact that you don't fall apart in her absence. It's the version of you that keeps building a life regardless of her decisions. It's self-respect, worn so naturally that it doesn't even need to be announced. That doesn't mean the outcome is guaranteed. Sometimes she comes back and the relationship is stronger for the space you both had to breathe. Sometimes she doesn't come back, and that has to be all right too, because the goal was never to control her choice. The goal was to become someone whose worth doesn't depend on her choice either way. That's not a consolation prize. That is genuinely the win. A person who walks away from you was never the one meant to stay, and a person who returns to you freely, without pressure, is choosing you for real reasons, instead of guilt or obligation. You are allowed to want her back. You are allowed to hope the silence ends the way you're hoping it does. None of this asks you to pretend you don't care. It only asks you to stop proving how much you care through panic and start proving it through the steadiness of how you live your life regardless of her response. That shift from chasing to grounding is the quiet revolution this entire video has been pointing towards. So here's what I want you to remember more than any single tactic we've covered today. You stop chasing. You stop over-explaining. You stop treating her silence as an emergency that only you can fix. And in that stillness, you don't lose yourself. You find the version of yourself that was attractive all along, the one that got buried under all that anxious effort. That version of you was always there. The silence didn't create it. It just gave it finally room to breathe. If any part of this resonated with where you are right now, know this: needing space to become that person isn't a flaw, and wanting someone back isn't weakness, it's human. What matters is which version of yourself you let lead, the one running on fear or the one running on self-respect. Choose the second one and watch how differently everything unfolds from here. If this video gave you something to sit with today, consider becoming part of this community so you don't miss what's coming next. There's a lot more ground to cover on this. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because tomorrow we're going deeper into another piece of this puzzle that most people never quite figure out. Until then, take care of yourself first. Everything else tends to follow.